They say the fields remember, that every stalk of wheat, every blade of grass, holds on the echoes of the past. But here, on this forgotten stretch of farmland in rural Iowa, the fields don't whisper, they scream. It was a night like any other, quiet, cold, and still. But by sunrise, the Wilkins family's isolated farmhouse would become a crime scene that even seasoned detectives could never forget. And the strangest part? No one, and I mean no one, has ever been able to explain what really happened here. Tonight, we're diving into the story that locals refuse to talk about, a massacre buried under decades of silence and fear. The Wilkins farm sat 3 miles down an unpaved road, surrounded by endless cornfields that moved like waves in the wind. It was the kind of place where neighbors were miles away, where nights were so quiet you could hear the hum of the power lines. The family, John and Margaret Wilkins and their 2 children, Sarah, 17, and little Tommy, just 8, had lived there for over a decade. They were well-liked, quiet, kept to themselves. But according to people who lived in the area back in 1984, strange things had started happening in the weeks leading up to the tragedy. Lights flickering in the farmhouse at odd hours. Footsteps echoing across the wooden porch when no one was home. Dogs barking at the empty fields. Their howls carrying deep into the night. The Wilkins family brushed it off. Rural life came with its quirks. But deep down, neighbors would later admit they knew something wasn't right on that farm. The last confirmed sighting of the family was on September 17, 1984. Margaret had gone into town for groceries, while John bought supplies from a local feed store. The cashier remembered John seemed distracted, maybe even nervous, constantly glancing toward the parking lot. Sarah had been seen earlier that evening at a high school football game. Friends said she seemed happy, laughing, but kept looking down at her phone, an old landline tucked into her bag. And little Tommy, according to a family friend, he spent the evening drawing strange pictures, jagged shapes, and dark figures, saying he was making friends with people in the fields. By midnight, every light in the farmhouse went dark. No calls were made. No vehicles were seen leaving the property. Nothing. It wasn't until 2 days later that a delivery driver noticed something strange. The Wilkins mailbox was stuffed full, and their old pickup truck sat in the same spot in the driveway, untouched. Sheriff's deputies were called out to check on the family. When they arrived, they found the front door slightly ajar. What they discovered inside still haunts them to this day. The living room looked frozen in time, a board game left unfinished on the coffee table, dinner plates still on the kitchen counter, and the television flickering static in the background. Upstairs was something out of a nightmare. John Wilkins was found in the hallway, sprawled against the wall, a deep gash across his chest. Margaret lay in the master bedroom, eyes wide open, her body twisted unnaturally. Sarah was discovered in her room, her bedsheets soaked in blood, her hands clutching something so tightly they had to be pried open. And little Tommy was never found. At first, investigators thought it was a home invasion gone wrong. But nothing had been stolen. Every piece of jewelry, every dollar in the house, remained untouched. There were no footprints in the dirt driveway, no tire tracks on the unpaved road leading in or out, and the phone lines, completely dead, as if someone had cut them long before the murders. Neighbors were questioned. Theories spread like wildfire. It was a drifter, some said. A jealous ex, others whispered. Or maybe, the oldest residents murmured, the land finally took what wanted. Autopsies revealed something even more disturbing. Each victim had deep, precise wounds, but no defensive marks. It was as though none of them had even tried to fight back. And then there were the symbols, scrawled on the kitchen wall, in something investigators said looked like a mixture of blood and dirt, were strange markings. No one could identify them, not even the FBI analysts brought in weeks later. The most chilling part of the Wilkins case wasn't just the brutality of the murders. It was a mystery of 8-year-old Tommy. His small bed upstairs was untouched. His toys were still scattered across the room. But every window in that room had been nailed shut from the inside. Search teams scoured the field for weeks. Bloodhounds were brought in. The National Guard combed through acres of farmland, old barns, and abandoned silos. Nothing, The only clue? A set of small, muddy footprints leading out toward the eastern edge of the property and stopping dead in the middle of the cornfield. By winter, the case had gone cold. Reporters moved on, and the farmhouse was eventually sold off to a family from out of state. But locals, they never forgot. Some refused to drive down that road after sunset. Others claim that even now, on quiet nights, you can still hear a child laughing faintly in the distance, or see a single light flicker in the upstairs window of the abandoned house. And here's where the story takes an even darker turn. Nearly 4 decades later, in 2022, a construction crew clearing nearby land made a discovery that would reopen the case and raise more questions and answers. Nearly 4 decades passed. The Wilkins farmhouse still stood, weathered, rotting, and consumed by creeping vines, but no one dared to live there. The land had been bought and sold a dozen times, yet the house always stayed empty, like it was waiting. Then, in the summer of 2022, everything changed. A construction company was hired to clear a section of the eastern fields. A developer wanted to build a row of modern homes on the land, but the locals shook their heads and muttered under their breath. They warned the workers, told them to stay away from the old property line, but no one listened. The first day of digging started like any other. The sun was high. The cicadas screamed in the heat, and heavy machinery rumbled across the land that had been untouched since that night in 1984. By mid-afternoon, a backhoe operator struck something hard, too solid to be dirt or stone. At first, they thought it was an old septic tank or some farm equipment buried decades ago. But when the dirt was brushed away, the truth froze everyone in place. It was a box, wooden, weathered, nailed shut. The crew stopped working and called their foreman, who, against his better judgment, pried the box open. What they found inside was impossible. Inside, wrapped in what looked like a mildewed bedsheet, was a child's shoe, small, blue, and next to it, a faded drawing. A stick figure family, for smiling figures, standing in front of a crooked house, with something dark towering above them, scribbled in thick black crayon. Authorities were called immediately. Within hours, sheriff's deputies had cordoned off the area. By nightfall, the entire site was crawling with investigators, forensic teams, and news vans. The discovery made headlines across the state. Human remains suspected at site of infamous Wilkins Farm Massacre. But what the public didn't know, wasn't printed in papers, was that the box hadn't been buried deep. It was as if someone had placed it there deliberately, just beneath the surface, waiting to be found. And there was something else. On the underside of the box, carved into the wood, were 3 words. "He is here." The sheriff in charge of the case, a man named Michael Anders, was only a rookie deputy when the original investigation happened. He'd been on the scene that night in '84, and as he stood over that box, staring down at the words carved into the wood, his hands shook. He told reporters later that it felt like the ground itself was warning him. Over the next week, more digging was done in the eastern field. Ground-penetrating radar detected several irregular shapes buried beneath the soil, objects that shouldn't have been there. At first, they thought maybe more boxes, maybe evidence that had been missed for nearly 40 years. But the deeper they dug, the stranger became. The objects weren't metal. They weren't wood. They were hollow. One investigator described them as old root cellars, small underground chambers, crudely dug and reinforced with rotting planks. Inside one of the chambers, they found a broken lantern, rusted chains, and dozens of handprints pressed into the dirt walls. Tiny handprints, children's handprints. And then there was a second box. This one was sealed tight with rusted nails. When they opened it, everyone fell silent. Inside were several Polaroid photographs, yellowed and water-stained, showing the interior of the Wilkins farmhouse, the living room, the kitchen, the bedrooms upstairs. But in every single photo, the family was there alive, sitting together, smiling, except for one detail. In every picture, standing in the corner, half in shadow, was a tall, thin figure. Its face was nothing but a blur. By now, the site had become a circus. News vans lined the edge of the fields, and conspiracy theorists from across the country camped out along the unpaved road, claiming the land was cursed, that it was haunted. Locals kept their distance, but they talked, quietly, fearfully. Some said the Wilkins family had made a deal with something they couldn't understand. Others said Tommy was still out there, now grown, living somewhere off the grid, hiding from whatever had taken his family. Sheriff Anders didn't believe in curses, but even he admitted that the evidence defied logic. Late one night, after the crews had gone home, Anders returned to the site alone. He walked the field in silence, his flashlight cutting to the rows of corn that had grown wild over the years. He stopped near the eastern edge of the property, the same spot where, decades earlier, little Tommy's footprints had vanished. And that's when he heard it. A laugh, faint, high-pitched, childlike. The sheriff froze. The air around him went still. No wind, no crickets, just silence. And that laugh again, closer this time. When he turned, his flashlight caught something between the rows. The briefest flicker of movement, a small figure, watching, and then it was gone. The next morning, Anders didn't tell anyone what he'd seen. He couldn't, not without sounding insane. But he ordered the area around the eastern field to be sealed off completely. No workers, no journalists, no one. For the next week, deputies patrolled the site, but strange things kept happening. Tools went missing. Heavy machinery was found drained of fuel overnight, and more than one worker claimed they'd seen someone stand at the edge of the field. A boy, barefoot, with pale skin, just staring. Then, on the seventh day, the digging stopped. The excavator operator, a man named Kyle Henderson, vanished during his shift. His machine was found idling near the edge of the woods, its cabin door wide open, his hard hat lying in the dirt. Search teams combed the area for 2 days, but there was no sign of Kyle. Just like Tommy, all those years ago, it was as if the ground had swallowed him whole. By now, state authorities were involved. The site was officially declared a crime scene, though no one could quite explain what crime had been committed. Investigators worked around the clock, analyzing the boxes, the photographs, the handprints in the dirt chambers. One detail, though, kept everyone awake at night. The photographs found in the second box were tested for age. They weren't from the 1980s. They weren't even from the 1990s. The Polaroids were new, less than a year old, which meant someone had been inside that farmhouse recently. And here's where the story takes a terrifying turn. Because just when investigators thought they'd seen the worst of it, a third box was found. This one wasn't buried in the field. It was sitting on the front porch of the abandoned farmhouse. No one had seen who left it there. No one saw a vehicle. Inside, wrapped in black cloth, was a cassette tape. And on the tape, in a voice that chilled even the most hardened detective, was a message. You're digging in the wrong place. He never left. He's waiting. And he's not alone.